I'm going to go over the first quiz that you took on arches and just make a brief description of each of the patterns, and you should be looking down on your completed worksheet and looking for the prints that you marked A. Looking at the first three prints, 1, 2, and 3, I want you to very simply see if you can see the ridges starting on one side, rising, forming a hill, and returning to the other side. Now, in this one, there is obviously something else going on here. On this one, there are ridges that rise and return, but if you look down lower, you can see that something else is happening here, so that would not be an arch. And on this one, it's very obvious that the ridges are starting on this side, rising and making a turn and coming back. So we can eliminate the first three as being arches quite easily. Let's now look at number 4, 5, and 6. In number 4, I think it should be very clear to you that we have the ridges starting on one side, rising in the center, and returning. And this is consistent from the top all the way to the bottom. There is no other ridge formations going on here except for this rise or hill. And if you'll remember, you could ride your bike up and down these ridges in my analogy. So 4 should be marked A. Number 5, we have ridges that start on one side, rise and return. However, there is something, and it's very important, that's how Curly used to say it, sorry about that. The very important ridges are in the center. Now these, if you compare to this one, these ridges are different, and therefore this cannot be considered an arch. Now let's draw attention to 6, and the ridges appear to rise in the center and in return. There is some disrupted ridges here, but that doesn't really change the flow of the ridges. In looking at 4, 5, and 6, 4 would be an arch, 6 would be an arch, and 5 would have this formation right here, which would disqualify it as being a plain arch pattern. Let's now look at 7, 8, and 9. In 7, it's clearly a different ridge formation from the hill, and that should be immediately disqualified as being an arch pattern. In number 8, clearly there is something else going on rather than the rise. And number 9, again, very outwardly apparent that this could not in any way be an arch pattern. Now I'm looking at making careful attention at number 10, and there are many ridges that appear to rise and recurve and return to the other side, completely consistent with a plain arch pattern. However, the important ridge right here is not making the smooth movement from left to right, and this ridge appears to be pointing upward. And if you remember the bicycle analogy, if you rode your bike up over this hill, that spike could give you a flat tire. And therefore, just this one ridge here is going to disqualify the plain arch, this from being a plain arch pattern. I'm looking at 11, 12, and 13 now. I hope you immediately recognize that this is an arch pattern, and although the ridges aren't as clear as the other ones, they start on this side, rise, and pretty much return to the other side. Number 12, however, is completely different. It's almost in opposite of this pattern in that there are a number of things going on here, none of them consistent with the plain arch. And this would be, of course, disqualified as being an arch. We may not know what it is yet, but we know it's not an arch pattern. Moving over to number 13, the same thing. We have something different going on. And this cannot be considered a plain arch. Now we're looking at 14, 15, and 16. And I hope as you look down on your answer sheet, you have placed an A here, here, but not here. These two are quite consistent in ridge flow, and they are certainly plain arch patterns, or the arch pattern. This, number 16, is clearly not consistent with the plain arch pattern, so it should not have been marked. Now I'm calling attention to 17, 18, 19. Again, this should be very clear to you that we do not have ridges rising on one side and returning to the other. 17, 18, and 19 do not have that. 19 is considerably different from 18, but the ridges appear to start on one side, and some of them rise and return, but in the very center we see something else going on, where the ridges are coming in and making a pointed direction. And this is completely inconsistent with a plain arch, and therefore it should not have been marked with an A. Let's now look at number 20, and hopefully you immediately recognized it is not a plain arch, but you may have recognized that it looks somewhat similar to number 19. There's a possibility that you may find that 19 and 20 are another type of pattern that you haven't learned yet. Now we're looking at 21, 22, and 23. Definitely you should be able to recognize that those are not plain arches, and you should not have the letter A marked on any of them. Let's now look at 24, 25, and 26. There's a good possibility that you may have recognized these ridges here to be consistent with a plain arch, because they appear to be starting on one side, rising and recurving. But you cannot not look at what else is going on here, where we have ridges that are going upward and they're actually traveling up and around, and some of these in here are making a curve. In this pattern, you have to look at it in its entirety, not just the lower section. So therefore you should not have marked this as an arch pattern. Now we're looking at 25, 26, and 27. 25 should not be mistaken for an arch. 26 and 27, however, are a little bit more difficult. And what I would like for you to remember here is the road test. And these ridges right here, this one and this one, they are pointing upward, could give your bike a flat tire, and therefore it is not a plain arch. You don't know what pattern it is, but it's not a plain arch. 27, 28, and 29, hopefully you're immediately drawn to number 29 and recognize it as the plain arch, and these two patterns definitely can't be the arch. Number 30 should easily be recognized as not being an arch pattern. Let's go to number 31, and we have ridges that rise and return like a plain arch, except for this region right here, which should be concerning, and these ridges appear to be pointed upward, and this one appears to actually end. And my interpretation of this would be it is not an arch. It is definitely not a plain arch in the first recognition of the pattern type. Let's move on to number 32 and 33. There, in no way, there should be, these prints should not be recognized as arch patterns. They are doing something totally different. This one especially has something going on here that is not consistent with an arch. 34, 35, and 36. Hopefully you're recognizing in all three of these that we do not have the smooth ridge formation rising from one side and returning to the other. None of these patterns are arches or plain arches. Let's go to 37, 38, and 39. Hopefully you immediately recognize 39 as being the plain arch, and 38 and 37 are considerably different than 39, and therefore they are not arches. Now looking at number 40, hopefully you recognized 40 and 39 to have the same general pattern flow, and if you were to identify this as an arch, a plain arch, you should also have recognized that this is the plain arch too. Let's look at 41, 42, and 43, and hopefully by now you immediately could rule these out as plain arch patterns. They are doing something completely different in these three patterns. Let's go to 44, 45, and 46. Again, these should be clearly determined not to be plain arch patterns. There is something completely different going on. And I hope you did recognize that 44 and 45 look somewhat similar to each other. They're not exactly the same, but they do have a similar pattern flow, and it is completely inconsistent with the plain arch pattern. Now I'm on 46, 47, and 48. Clearly, you should be able to see that these are not the plain arch pattern. They do not have that rise, hill, and return. Okay, I'm going to do a quick review of which of the patterns are plain arches, and you can check against your sheet. I'm looking at 1, 2, 3 are not plain arches. I'm looking at number 4 as a plain arch. Number 5 is not a plain arch. 6 is a plain arch. 7, 8, 9, and 10 are not plain arches. 11 is an arch. 12, 13 are not plain arches. 14 and 15 side by side, they are both plain arches. 16, 17, 18, and 19, and 20 are not plain arches. Let's drop down to 21, 22, 23, and 24. They are not plain arches. 25, 26, 27 are not plain arches. 28, not a plain arch. 29 is. 30 is not a plain arch. 31, though not very clear here, is not a plain arch. 32, 33, 34, and 35 are all not our plain arch patterns. 36, 37, 38 are not plain arches. 39 and 40, this pair down here, they are plain arches. 41, 42, 43, 44 are not plain arches. 45, 46, 47, 48, 49 are not plain arches. And 50 is a plane arch. So this has been a review of us just trying to find the plane arch pattern. And now in the next quizzes that you take in the future, you'll be looking for the next pattern that you learn along with the plane arch in your quizzes.